This is attorney Andy Marcantel and attorney Rachel Moss from the Attorneys for Freedom Law Firm, and we are coming to you from Dallas, Texas, the NRA National Conference. We got another great guest here. He's already got us laughing before we even turn the cameras on. David Lombardo, welcome to the show, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know, are we doing comedy hour or are we actually talking law?
I'm ready.
Well, my very first question for you, sir, what are your pronouns so we make sure to get those correct?
I would tell you, but you'd have to bleep it out, so it wouldn't go over well, yeah.
Well, you have a pretty amazing CV. You came by the booth yesterday and we were talking to you. This is a networking event. There's so many people here who are involved in this world in different aspects, right? We're criminal defense attorneys. You're a long-time expert with a lot of experience. I know it's a daunting task, but do you mind starting by explaining who you are, what's your background, what are your qualifications as an expert? Introduce yourself.
Long time, great. So I started in the Civil War, and I've been working forward since then. I actually heard Lincoln do the Gettysburg Address, okay?
And he advised him on it.
I told him, use an envelope. I have what I consider an eclectic life. Many of my relatives consider it a life where you can't hold a job, but they're both closely related. I was one of the least stellar students in the history of high school. I played in a rock band, and I just didn't study. I never did squat, right? And I flunked out of one school and blah, blah, blah. And then I went in the Army, joined the Army, volunteered to go to Vietnam. And that has an interesting way of sort of shifting your personality. And when I got out, I was ready to go to college. So I went to the University of Illinois, went into aviation, and this is actually pertinent. I went into aviation, and this is the 70s, the decade of the 70s. And what was happening at that point was there was such a thing as human factors, but it was sort of nondescript.
What's a human factor?
So human factors is what we used to call, and if you're counting pronouns, we used to call it the man-machine interface. Okay, now it's the his, her, it, whatever interface.
Right.
But there's two aspects of human factors. One is engineering. It's building a product so it's friendly to people. The other half is the educational, psychological part. It's learning to deal with objects, okay? So I'm on that side. I'm on the touchy-feely side, the psychology side. I can't even spell engineering. But there were some courses in human factors engineering back in the 70s, very little on the human factors personal side. So I was in the aviation research lab at the University of Illinois, and we were studying what causes airplane accidents. And they're mostly human factors. They blame the pilot, but what we were looking at is not who do you blame, but why? What judgments went bad, you know? And when you look at that, safety is like a net. It's like an umbrella. And so what we were doing in those days, and so too was Purdue and a bunch of other universities, but what we were doing in those days is we were kind of looking at developing an umbrella system, safety system that fits all occasions. Well, when I retired and I came over to this side, I got out of aviation and came to the gun world, that paradigm fits perfectly. The safety management system, I call it. Now, everything is the same until you get all the way down to the bottom indice. So flying a jet's not the same as pulling a trigger or riding a motorcycle. But that's the very bottom line. That's the practical part. Everything that goes around it, that umbrella, transfers over. And I'm writing a book now to put that out. And in court, clubs like shooting clubs and ranges and things like that, they don't understand that. And they just get crucified in court because they have no preparation. Do you remember back to first year law school, it was Paulsgraf versus Long Island Railway?
You and I talked about this case a little bit yesterday.
So Paulsgraf, for those who don't know it, in a very short thing, is Paulsgraf boils down to when you go to a grocery store and there's that yellow thing on the floor that says piso mojado because there's water on the floor, that's Paulsgraf. Paulsgraf simply says if you're going to be open to the public, you have to ask yourself what reasonably could go wrong. What could you reasonably expect? What are you going to do to prevent it? And what are you going to do if it happens? Okay, that's Paulsgraf. So you go to a gun range and somebody gets accidentally shot and they go, well, you know, we had a range safety officer. They have no umbrella. There's no recurrent training. They don't check people out when they hire them. I mean, and they get eaten alive every single time.
Yeah. So you said you appear in court, and just for our viewers who may not be familiar with you, you're an expert witness.
Yes.
You use of force cases. What type of testimony do you give in a court of law that would be helpful to a case?
Sure. So I really kind of do two areas. One is anything that has to do with the firearm, and in particular, the human factor aspect. For instance, if you watch somebody, I don't know how much shooting experience you have, but if I put a gun on the table and I ask you to pick it up, when you pick it up, I can tell you if you've had training with it.
Immediately.
Okay, you just know. Yep. Okay, so and basically one of the key things is the trigger. A trigger is in the position. It's a human factors engineering decision. This is where the index finger is going to fall when you hold the gun. Okay, so there's a trigger there. The downside is you have to teach people who are new not to put their finger on the trigger until they're ready to shoot. So inevitably, when somebody who doesn't know what they're doing picks up the gun, their finger immediately goes on the trigger, so you know right away, right? So that's a human factors engineering thing. Now, the other side of that coin is when people are operating the gun. I had a murder case. They charged him with first-degree murder, shooting his wife, and he says, I didn't shoot the gun, I didn't pull the trigger. Well, through a series of bad ways of holding the gun while he was trying to unload it, he did, in fact, pull the trigger, just didn't realize he did it, and we knocked it down from a first degree to a negligent manslaughter. So that's the human factors part of it.
And that's the part that you specialize in, is that human side of it.
Right. Yeah. So I do first degree murder, I do all that kind of stuff. But then the second half is I have one of the biggest shooting clubs in the Midwest. I took it from literally the brink of bankruptcy and built it up to a huge, great club. It's one of the best in the country, and I've run a bunch of clubs. And so I also deal with problems with shooting clubs, gun stores, accidental discharges in gun stores, all that safety management stuff. I deal with that too.
So my understanding is you're based in Illinois, but you do cases nationwide. You do them all over the place.
Sure, I go all over the country.
How's that work, actually? Do attorneys reach out to you and say, I got a case that I think you could add something to help clarify some things, explain things to the jury?
Sure. I mean, they call up and they have to be a little careful because if I have a conflict, they don't want to, So they'll call up and I'll say, well, tell me basically what it is. They give me the basics of what it is. Most of the time I'm good. Sometimes I'm not, and I know other people. And I'll say, well, I got a guy that you can call, and that's his sort of area.
Yeah. So, and there are very few of the people that do a good job at what you do, right? We oftentimes associate with people all over the country as use of force experts. And when we find a good one, we like to really grab onto them tight and try to make some sort of a long-term win-win deal with them because, this stuff is really, really helpful when we're trying to explain these things to a jury. Super, super important concepts, especially considering you're going to get a jury that aren't necessarily knowledgeable about guns.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. And if you find such an expert, let me know. I'd like to know who he is. But the interesting thing, and I say this to clients, in court, and sometimes attorneys bristle, but in court, the truth is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is perception. And so there are people who know more about guns than I do. But I'm just good at telling the story. And that's like a big deal. I'm good at writing because I was a journalist for 16 years, and I'm good at telling stories. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean, it's factual, but I know how to deal with it. I know how to look at the jury at the right time and that sort of stuff. And so that's really the biggest part of it. You have to be good at interfacing with people.
Yeah, you had some really interesting things, too, on your CV that we reviewed that it's kind of interesting from different walks of life that would lend themselves to being a good storyteller. You want to list a few things that you think have helped you along the way?
I think that the biggest thing ever that helped me, there's a place in Chicago called the Second City. And out of Second City, John Belushi came out of Second City. Dan Aykroyd did, but the Canadian Second City. It was the place where stand-up comedians came out, improv, really, but there's very little.
It's a comedy
real
club.
Improv. Yeah, exactly. I was there for 2 years, and it's insanity. I mean, it's true insanity. And I was much older. And interestingly enough, they sort of break it down like a university in semesters. And the first semester, there's a lot of lawyers that take it because the first semester is not about comedy at all. The first semester is about shut up and listen to what people are saying. When we talk to people, the tendency is while you're talking to me, I'm deciding what I'm going to say. I'm not really paying attention. And in improv, the most fundamental part of improv is you really have to listen to what the person is saying so that you can key off of it. And so that's what they teach you. Shut up and listen and then respond. And in court, I mean, that's basically everything. Listening to what you're being asked and being able to process that information rapidly and come back with a reasonable answer.
Yeah. So what do you learn after the first semester?
Well, it starts to get towards being funny, and it's insane. It's a great time. And I had the luxury because I did this back in the probably the early 90s. One of the founders of improv, Jo Forsberg, she was one of the founders of the Compass Players, was where it originally started, was still teaching. And I studied with her for a year, and I studied with a guy named Shepard, David Shepard was one of the founders originally of improv, and I worked with him for a while. So I got improv at its... Actually, improv, a lot of people don't know this. David Shepard started the concept of improv because he was a socialist, which is not me, but he wanted to go to the bars in the south side of Chicago, the working guy bars, and do improv political stuff and to pitch in socialism, okay? So he had come back, he'd been out of state for years, and he'd come back and he got a couple of us together. He was working on a project that wasn't as much socialist, and studying with him was very interesting to learn the real roots of improv.
And then I saw you worked as a comedic actor for 10 years as well.
So, well, it depends on your perspective. There were directors who might disagree. I specialized in comedy, but if you ask any actor, the truth is you're basically a hooker. I mean, that's what you are. And if they come along and they dangle $100 bill and say, put on a clown suit and let me beep your nose, you go,
what a lot of lawyers are, to be
fair. I can do that. Hell yes. So, but yeah, I lean more towards the comedic type stuff. I did industrials, I did commercials, I did film. I worked with some very famous people. I worked with Harrison Ford, and I worked with Joe Pesci and a bunch of other people. So it was great fun. I have a great story about Harrison Ford, in fact.
Do tell.
Oh, yeah.
So in the filming of The Fugitive, I was what they call a day player. They hired me for one day. So it wasn't an extra, but it was just one day. And we shot a scene with Harrison Ford. At the beginning of the film, I walk in to check my coat, and he's behind me. And when I check my coat and turn off, he appears, okay? So we sat about a half a day just talking. So what happened was we had to bring our own tuxedos. And I have a tuxedo with a black cape with red silk lining. And he walked onto the set, and he saw that, and he looked at that, and he goes, I love that cape. Would you mind if I wore that cape? And I go, sure, yeah, be my guest. Well, Wardrobe wouldn't let him wear it, so I wore it, and we did the scene. And not to get away from the whole point of the story, as it turned out, the guy who was the villain in that movie died during the filming of the movie, and all the scenes that were shot at the Four Seasons Hotel where we were had to be reshot with the new villain, and I was on vacation in Canada fishing, and the scene was never reshot. But fast forward about 10 years, and I'm a journalist in aviation, and he's a big pilot, well-known pilot, and they made him, I think they call it Dove 1, if I recall. So Cessna, he owns a bunch of airplanes. One of them is a Cessna jet. Cessna every year does, with the Special Olympics, they get owners of Cessna jets and they fly kids to wherever the Olympics are. And they made him the lead plane. So he was doing a presser at the National Business Aircraft Association. Now, he's sort of well known for not giving, interviews because he stammers. A lot of people don't know that. I sat in the front row. And he did his thing, and I immediately jumped up and I went up to him and I said, you won't remember me, but I'm going to bet that you'll remember a cape with a red silk lining. He goes, we shot a scene in The Fugitive together.
Yeah.
And I go, we did. And I said, I would love to interview. I know you don't like to do that. I'm not going to talk about Hollywood. I just want to talk about, the airplane and the kids. And out of 100 journalists, I'm the only one that got an interview.
That's amazing.
That's
Yeah, it was great.
Was it a good interview?
It was. People loved it. Yeah.
That's great. Any good Joe Pesci stories?
Joe Pesci.
That's a huge Pesci fan
Joe
myself.
Pesci is a priceless guy. So again, I'm a day player. And did you see the movie With Honors?
No.
So Joe Pesci is a bum. And he's living, this is a true story, he's living on Harvard campus and students are like feeding him and stuff, right? So that was a movie about him. And I'm in a social security office or something like that. And it's Joe Pesci, Brendan Fraser, and a woman and me. And the woman could not remember her line. We shot that scene 15 times. And it got to the point where the crew was like walking on needles, And Joe Pesci's just sitting there. And so the next thing I know, they go to do another take, and he shoots a rubber band at me. Now, if I'd have shot a rubber band at him, I'd have been fired.
Yeah, you'd be done.
But he shot it at me, so I just shot it back. Now we're in a rubber band fight, back and forth. So they go, okay, come on, serious. Let's do a take. And she kept tripping on a word. And Joe Pesci wrote that word on a Post-it note and slapped it on his forehead. And when she looks up at him, she goes, and this is the...
And she nails it.
She read the word and nailed the line.
That's great.
Yeah, 16 takes, I think.
How you know he's a pro.
Yeah, he's a very funny guy.
How did your background in comedy help you with your career?
Well, here's the thing about comedy, and there used to be a commercial for some deodorant and said, never let him see you sweat. And in comedy, the biggest thing in comedy is you never break the wall. You, no matter what you think, no matter what you feel, you got to be on, right? And it's that way in court. There's days, you go to court, you don't really want to go to court. You have no choice. You go to court. And so you learn to just flip that switch. And I am who I am, and I do what I do. And I try and keep it lighthearted because it makes it easier for the jury. If the jury likes you, life is much simpler.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
On that note, I saw a recent interview with Conan O'Brien, an obvious comedy great.
Yeah.
And he was saying that one of the worst things a guest could do when they come on the show is say aloud, "It's not going very well, is it?" And he said, as he described it, he says sometimes they'll come in and they're doing okay, the guests are doing okay, a couple laughs here and there, and then they turn to the audience and they say, "This isn't going very well, is it?" He says he described it as seeing 300 souls leaving 300 bodies in the audience, because you got the comedy's all about they're there to be entertained. They want to see confidence. They want to see people with their game face on.
I had a radio show in Chicago, just ended, but 11 years on the #1 conservative talk station in Chicago. And the worst thing on the planet is 5 seconds of dead air. And we would get politicians on, and here's the worst thing. You go, so what do you think of whatever? It's okay. Okay, so we got 59 minutes.
Yeah, thanks for weighing in on that.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you think that kind of translates to a jury as well? Because I've been in cases where there's a really long trial and you can see the jury gets a little, they start to fall asleep on you. Do you feel like that kind of plays into your role as an expert witness as well?
Nobody falls asleep on me.
I love it.
I have nailed, I think I told you, I've nailed the prosecutor.
Yeah,
before.
Tell that story. That's a great story. I've done a couple of zingers like that. I really have. I'll tell you that one, but there's a better one. They always try and discredit you. Right.
And I have to preface this by saying you better understand the judge before you. Some judges would never tolerate it, but this judge was a really friendly guy. And so the prosecutor says to me, "Well, Mr. Lombardo, when's the last time you actually did this kind of work?" And I go, "Yesterday." Well, that threw him because he wasn't expecting to hear that. So then he goes, "Are you being paid to be here?" Well, of course I am. He knows that. And I say, "Yes." And he goes, "How much is it?" And I get $450 an hour. And he looks at the jury, and in grandiose terms, he goes, $450 an hour? That's a lot of money, isn't it? And I go, "Well, I've been doing this since 1966. The Army trained me to shoot." And most of that time I didn't get paid. And there were a lot of that time I paid somebody to teach me stuff. So to me, it's sort of like recouping what I spent. And then I turn to the jury and I go, but I understand when you hear $450 an hour, that does sound like a lot of money. But you know what? I still can't afford to wear a suit like the prosecutor has. And the jury about came out. Even the judge looked at me laughing and he goes, do you think we could stick to the script in this trial? And I go, okay. But I had one, if you got a minute.
Of course.
Yes.
I had one. It was an 8-hour deposition. 6 LA attorneys were on me for 8 hours.
Wow, that's a
Zoom.
long day.
That's brutal.
Oh, yeah, on Zoom. It was brutal. They kept trying to get me to change my mind, and I wouldn't do it. And that's a whole different thing. That's another whole thing, that case. But at some point, one of the guys was one of these, try and intimidate you type, real, direct and loud and all that kind of stuff. And I just got tired of it. And I let him rant in his question, and I finally said, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I was so busy trying to decide if you thought you were intimidating me, I didn't get it. And that just, even one of the attorneys that was on Zoom started to laugh. He shot him down, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. What's Safer USA?
Safer USA actually started because I'm an attorney. I got out of the Army and went to the University of Illinois. I was there for 10 years. And because I was a Vietnam guy, people would go, you know how to shoot? And I go, yeah. I said, would you teach me to shoot? And I go, sure. So I was teaching people to shoot. And one day, I was doing that for years. And one day, an attorney said, could you teach me how to shoot? And of course, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. He said, give me your contract or whatever. I said, I don't have one. He goes, you have a waiver or something, right? And I go, no, I don't have anything. And he goes, you understand the liability that you... And I go, no. And he told me. And a month later, in 2006, I was incorporated.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a little scary, actually. So it started just as a shooting school. And I've done 8,000 students over there since 2006. But it became an umbrella, really. I was a journalist before I retired, and I kept doing it afterwards. I just switched over to talking about shooting instead of about aviation. So that fell under that, Safer USA. And then I did public speaking. I had the radio show. That fell under Safer USA. Everything I did, it just fell under the blanket of Safer USA. Yeah. This falls under the blanket of Safer USA.
You have a very eclectic background, yeah.
Or the bum that can't keep a job. One of those
Sounds like
two
you stay
things.
busy, though.
That's awesome. What's your favorite of all of these different projects that you've worked on? What's the closest one to your heart? Can you pick one?
I love the radio show.
Can you tell us about that?
I truly love the radio show. It was 1 hour a week. It was called On Target Radio. What we did was this, because it was Chicago's #1 talk station, so we had some big people on it, Hannity, and there are all kinds of heavyweights. Yeah. And when we started the show, I said, there's no way we can compete with people like that. They got bottomless buckets of money, they got producers, and it's me. And so Gretchen and I, basically what we set it out to be is like we're your next door neighbor. Right? Like the next door couple. And we're just talking over coffee about whatever interested us. And literally, of course, we did a lot of two-way stuff, but literally, we broke the story about they have traffic cameras in Chicago at the intersections. And they put in these cameras. If you go through on a yellow, they shortened the yellow so that you couldn't make it through, right? And you get a red, and it would flash a picture.
How did you learn about that?
Because I got nailed.
From experience?
Yeah, first-hand experience. We did some research in the field.
I hit an intersection, the light was yellow, and by the time I got across the street, it was red, and I go, whoa, that's not right. There's a federal limit. And so I came back a few days later with a stopwatch, and I timed it, and it was short. It was lower than the feds. So we broke that story, and what they said was, well, we put these cameras in to do away with the T-bones, the T-bone accidents, right? Because you go through and you get hit. Well, that was a bunch of bull because it increased the tail accidents. Guys that see yellow light, they hit the brake and they get rear-ended.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with safety. The Tribune, Chicago Tribune, is the one that did the research, and they discovered that what it really was, because they said, well, they're all over Chicago. Not so much. They were all over the wealthy part of Chicago. It was $100 a ticket, And they put them in neighborhoods where no one was going to go to court for $100. They go, I'm not going to take a day off to go to war. One camera made $1 million in 1 year.
Oh, my goodness.
That's unreal.
Yeah, that's crazy. And you guys broke that story.
Well, the original part was, that the cameras were bogus, that it wasn't what they were saying.
And so other news sources picked that up or went off of that and did an investigation.
So we talked about everything. I mean, just anything that struck our fancy. Second Amendment stuff. We talk about world issues, whatever. And then we did silly stuff that went right up to the line. You know what I'm saying? So that our engineer was like, his finger was on the button. He's just
in case.
He's just waiting for it. We did, for instance, the Beaver Show, and that was he was right there.
I don't know if I want to know this, but what is the Beaver
Ask
Show?
the question.
Well, so
Joey, get your finger on this.
So what happened was, I don't like the cold. And I just got sick and tired in the winter of going out with like concealed carry guys and standing knee deep in snow and shooting. So I did the logical thing. I told Gretchen she had to do it. So she decided she was going to do it, but it's cold. So she wore a beaver coat.
Okay.
So she got to be known as the instructor with the beaver. Okay. Now, so we were talking about that on the radio, and I made some comment about Gretchen's beaver, and we got beeped. They
wonder why.
Our crew is loving this right now.
So we got beeped, and we went to station break. Well, when we came back, the second city poured out of my body. We came back on, and I go, and we're back with more on Target Radio, and you're listening to AM 560 The Answer. Listen, I have to explain something here. We got beep going out because I said the word beaver, and I said it's totally out of context. I went to high school, our mascot was a beaver. Every day I went to school, it was beaver. We had beaver all over the place. And I just went down the road for like 10 minutes on this thing.
Beep.
Well, he couldn't because I was talking about an animal, right? And that show, it maybe lasted 5 minutes. And to this day, that was years ago. To this day, people still go, I heard the Beaver Show.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I could definitely see how your sense of humor and everything like that would make you more likable to a jury because, like you said, it's
sick and twisted.
Yeah,
sick and twisted. Yeah.
Yeah, love that. We want to ask if there's anything you want to plug on our show, a website, something like that. We can.
I sell a cough remedy medicine that I from the back of a wagon.
Some snake oil from you.
No, I do some consulting, and I'd like to do more. One of the things that really does bother me is the number of accidents I've had at ranges, gun clubs, and that kind of thing. One of the problems with gun ranges and gun stores and stuff, and I don't mean this to be pejorative, but one of the problems is they're run by gun people, and they're not all business people. And they don't think the stuff through. From our perspective, a legal perspective, you literally need to know from the time I unlock that door to the time I lock that door at the end of the day, I have to have it accounted for. If somebody, I had a guy who accidentally shot himself in the store, he worked there, showing a gun to somebody, and another employee had loaded it. That's a different thing. But he shot himself in the hand, clipped an artery. You see in the video a woman who works in the store running towards him with a towel, and you think, okay, well, she starts mopping up the blood. She ignores him. He's squirting blood out of an artery, and she's mopping it up off the floor. He puts a belt around his arm, his own belt. He gets in his car and drives to the hospital.
That's insane.
They don't even call 911.
So they just didn't have any policies in place for how to deal with this type of an emergency.
Right.
Wow.
And so, and we got $1.1 million settlement for a guy for shooting himself in a store because they were totally unprepared for it.
In that particular case, was there any additional damage he suffered because of the fact that he wasn't treated right away?
He to this day he doesn't have full use of his hand. It was partial, but not full use. He went right through the nerve, through the artery. Yeah.
And I'm guessing there was some negligence in the first place from loading that firearm.
Which was another employee.
Yeah.
But he pulled the trigger. But it's a comparative negligence state. So you look at his portion compared to the others. And
Yeah, absolutely. So where can people find information about your consulting business?
Guntestimony.com.
Link in the description, folks.
Guntestimony.com.
Guntestimony.com. Anything else you'd like our viewers to know about you? Or?
I can go on forever, so just get the hook. Pull me off.
Love it. All right.
I kind of wanted to ask you, since we're criminal defense attorneys, I noticed that you've done a lot of civil testimony. What are some of the biggest issues that you are asked to talk about in these civil defense cases for ranges?
Here's the thing. If you build a personal range, if you're out in most counties, I don't know every county in the country, but in most counties, there's little or no ordinances for privately owned ranges in an unincorporated area. And so people go out there and they think, I can do anything I want. I had a case in McHenry County, Illinois, where a guy on his property had a range set up. He had a 2-foot berm, 2 foot. And it literally butted up next to an equestrian trail. And the park district called me up and said, look, we don't want to shut the guy down. We just wanted to build the berm up, okay? Because there's bullets in the trees where our guys ride. And he just flat out wouldn't do it. And that was, and I said to him in court, I looked at the judge and I said, I have to just say something. Not as an expert, I just have to say something. He goes, what? I said to this guy, I know somebody with a bobcat. I will come to your house with a bobcat and help you build that. He wouldn't do it.
Wow. What was the ultimate result in that one?
We had to shut him down.
Wow.
And that was totally avoidable. It was totally avoidable. So that's a big thing. And then also people, they get into disagreements and stuff on ranges and they get their nose out of joint. They threw me off and it wasn't justified and I paid and they won't give me my money, that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of civil suits that go back for shooting. We had a guy get shot on a shotgun. 12 guys go to a range in Florida and it's sporting clays. 12, okay? 3 of them have never shot in their life. They're broken into 3 groups of 4. What do you think they do with the 3 guys? They put them in one
They're
group.
all in one group.
And nobody supervises them.
Oh, no.
One guy gets his finger shot off.
Yeah.
Well,
That's reasonably foreseeable.
And it's one of those things that if there was a
Absolutely.
policy in place for that kind of situation, probably would
Zip.
have never happened.
Nothing. They didn't
Awesome.
have anything.
So you consult with folks at gun ranges, call you and ask you for reasonable policy suggestions.
What I like to do is say, look, you need to sit down. Let's come up with what I call a safety management system that covers everything. When somebody gets shot in your store, you ought to call 911. But the problem is you have to do recurrent training.
Yeah.
Because, it's an extinguishable thing, so people have to be reminded.
All right. Well, make sure you cover your butt if you own a range and call David and get some consulting. And we put his link in the description. David, thank you so much for coming on our podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Such an interesting, awesome guest. We appreciate talking to you.
Laughed a lot.
Yeah, that was great. Everybody can check out attorneysonretainer.us to learn all about our self-defense program and what it can do for you. Check out attorneysforfreedom.com to learn all about our law firm and how we defend people in the criminal justice system. If you enjoyed this video, throw a like on it, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment down below. Until next time, this is attorney Andy Marcantel and attorney Rachel Moss and our good friend David signing off. Peace.